Hi, I'm Dee Dee Davis, and I am here with the recent winner of the primary election for the Escambia County Commission District 2, Doug Underhill. And our intent here today is to let you get to know the candidate a little better and judge for yourself about his qualities and qualifications to go back to the Escambia County Board of Commissioners. And Doug, it's good to be here with you again.
It's good to be with you again, Dee Dee.
And you know, let's start off first of all by talking about the takeaways from your primary win. It was a little bit closer than a lot of people had thought that it would be. So what do you attribute your success there? Tell me what you learned.
Well, it was closer than most people would have anticipated, but that really does tell you what the power of a lot of money and negative campaigning can do. We were polling nearly 70% satisfaction before all that negativity began, and it ended up at 52% at the on election night. But it also tells you that the basics of good campaigning, door to door, a huge volunteer base that gets out there and waves signs, and talks to friends, is still the right way to win. You don't have to be backed by the money and beholden to the money in order to be an elected official, to gain office, and also to maintain office. That's really the big takeaway, I think, from the primary.
Did your opponent raise more money than you did in the primary?
By a lot, by quite a bit, yes. Between a political action committee that was funded by some people that I had made rather unfavorable decisions for, and then direct contributions. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the numbers were. The funny thing about when a primary is over, everybody else has the luxury of talking about the primary, but as the candidate, you need to start on the general immediately, and so that's what we did.
That's true. That's why I wanted to talk about some of the takeaways there, because it will be a much different race now that you'll be running against someone from a different political party. A primary, in many ways, is often even more brutal because it's an in-house election, as it was the last time. So,
and you know, Dee Dee, it's very disappointing that we get through a primary, and it looks like we're probably going to be going through a general as well, in which we have very few real debates where we talk about the real issues that affect the citizens of Escambia County. When we talk about, when we have 45 seconds to respond to a question, you may as well ask the question saying, in the next 45 seconds, give me your soundbite on mass transit, because you're not going to get any depth in 45 seconds, and that does not help the citizen make an intelligent decision at the ballot box.
And that's very, very true. And for that reason, I've kind of jotted down just a handful of issues that I thought that maybe we could tackle today. They seem to be the headline issues. They seem to be the ones that pack the meetings. So I thought that maybe you could frame up the issue for us and then talk a little bit about the controversy.
And that's why I'm so excited about this, because these are the things that were still on the list when we ran out of time last time.
Well, we did run out of time, and we had intentions of, I think, taking on about 9 issues before, and it was probably more like
Noble
4.
intention.
Yes, well, I'll try to do better. Let's first of all talk about beach access. So frame it up for us. What's the issue there?
So for me, when I think about an issue, I have to start with the philosophical. Okay, from me, philosophically, when you are a beach town, when you're a coastal community, access to the water is a fundamental building block of infrastructure. It's no less important than roads and gutters and that kind of thing, because part of living here, part of the texture of our lifestyle is access to the beach. If you live in Pensacola but you don't have access to the water, then you may as well live in Kansas. No harm done to Kansas.
We understand.
But it is who we are. Our culture is inextricably tied to the water. So if our citizens don't have access to the water, then you're creating a rend in the fabric of who we are. So beach access is a fundamental responsibility of the government.
So, talk about beach access in District 2.
Okay, so funny, most of the press was focused on beach access in District 4 out on Pensacola Beach. Perdido Key is a fairly unique island in that we do have private property rights that extend all the way down to the mean high water line. Having said that, and people will oftentimes point that out and say, well, it's a private beach. Well, not really, because 60%, more than 60% of the land on Perdido Key is owned by the government and held by the government for public use and for habitat protection. So the lion's share of Perdido Key is actually public access. Now, we've got local public access, and the beach access is 1, 2, and 3. We've got state access and a couple of amazing state parks, and then we have, of course, Gulf Islands National Seashore, which is a gem. And each one of those goes from free access to $3 or $4 for a day to $20 for a day. So what you have there is a very wide diversity of offerings. Some of them on the beach side, some on the sound side, and people say, well, that's not really the beach. But if you've got a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, you don't want to be in that surf. You want to be over there on that sound side, and I know that because when ours were babies, that's what we did. So that diversity of offerings is really what makes Perdido so unique. But it's also what makes Escambia unique. We have downtown waterfront, we have kind of party waterfront out on Pensacola Beach, and we have this very environmentally sensitive and ecotourism waterfront out on Perdido Key. As you evolve as a tourist or as a citizen, the offerings that we have on the water grow with you. And that's I don't know of any other place in America that it works that way.
So why the controversy on this issue right now?
So when we purchased beach access, there are two things that always come into play, and they either can walk hand in hand, as two wings on the airplane, or they can be two sides of the seesaw, and that is the environmental protection and public access. Because public access, the more people you put on a piece of land, and everybody knows this, the less desirable it is from an environmental point of view. So in order to achieve and maintain the balance on Perdido Key, we have to take our environmentally sensitive land, make sure we preserve that, and we're under federal mandate to do that under the Habitat Conservation Plan. So if we don't do that, then the federal government will come in and say, okay, you've proven that you can't do it, we're going to do it for you. Nobody wants that. So you preserve those very sensitive lands for beach mouse habitat and for Habitat Conservation Plan, and then you maximize the human footprint and the amenities that go with a day to the beach all in one place. So we created the Perdido Key Master Plan. When I say we, this actually predated me as a commissioner, and this was citizen-driven, to create a master plan for the final development of the island that ensures public access, not just the people who live on the island, those of us that are blessed enough to buy and own there, but we are equity holders, but so are people who live in cantonment. They're equity holders as well because that's their beach as well. So there was a purchase made just before I came into office of an old Sundown property. It was a condo that got demolished in Ivan. And promises were made, as politicians often do, where they promise this out of this hand they're going to do this, and out of that hand they're going to do that. But the reality is that with a property like the Sundown property, you cannot achieve the goals of habitat conservation and the goals of high-density beach access. The highest and best use of that land is to use it as beach mouse mitigation property. Okay, so I can only squeeze maybe 27 parking spots on there if I was just build it out as a beach access. But using it as mitigation property, I can maximize my access, my parking, and maximize how I build out the other beach accesses for the people. So if you think about it, it really is just a property that's if you're trying to be an environmental property, focus on the things that are environmental. Trying to make beach access, you focus on those things that make the human experience on the island awesome. I want you to be able to come onto Perdido Key, park your car one time, enjoy the entire day, get a sunburn, drive over that bridge, coming back onto the mainland with your kids saying, that was the best day of my life.
No way to make everyone happy on this issue?
No, there absolutely is. But what you can't do is try to make everyone happy on every parcel of land. You have to look at the big picture. The way to make sure that you balance all of these equities is to look at Perdido Key as a whole and not just think about what you can achieve today, but what you can achieve 20 years from now, okay? Because the final build out of Perdido Key is going to take place over 20 years. And in that time, once that's finished, we will have missed all of our great opportunities, or we will have taken all of our great opportunities.
So where are we on this issue? What's next?
I think that what's next is, once the issue came up in the campaign and it was very, very volatile and a lot of opinion and kind of short on facts. Now that the staff has really looked at it and done and reviewed it and put that information together for my peers, I think my peers recognize that what I was saying all along, because it was based on the same analysis, is that using that as mitigation property, not getting into a fighting, running gun battle with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and looking at Perdido Key and just continuing the master plan, which, by the way, was passed with a 5-0 vote.
And so this will be a vote coming up when?
I don't actually anticipate that there will be a vote coming up on that parcel of land. We do have the opportunity with the Restore project. I expanded our Restore project before I brought that as one of my projects. I expanded it to not just include a single parcel, but again, going back to the philosophical of public access for as many of the remaining land parcels as are available. Now, anyone in real estate knows that this is a finite commodity. And if you do not if you don't acquire it today, but you want it tomorrow, you'll pay more for it tomorrow. So your best bet is to acquire now while we can, and then build out the amenities as needed as our customer base coming onto the island requires it. Right now there are 500 parking spots on Perdido Key on the Gulf front, and another 300 on the Sound side. That's 800 parking spots. That's quite a bit of access, most of which goes unused quite often. So we're not in a crisis for creating that access today, especially when you drive through the rest of my district and you see roads crumbling, you see stormwater management, things that haven't been fixed since 2014, and all those things. So we have higher priorities with our money. But this project and making sure that we have beach access on the island forever, that is the highest and best use of Restore money. Because if you think about it, what is that Restore money? That Restore money was punishment to a company that denied us as citizens access to our own beaches. What better thing to do with that money than to ensure that access forever?
Well, let's move on. As long as we're talking about controversial issues, let's move on and talk about the Escambia County Area Transit. ECAT.
Yeah, and I think most citizens know that many of our buses run empty.
And let's frame up the issue here.
Okay.
So, in general, the Board of Commissioners has taken over management from a private company, correct?
We have.
And how much will this supposedly save taxpayers annually?
Well, it's hard to say, because when we save $300,000 in just the profit margin of that third-party vendor that was providing a service. But then there are other expenses that we incur as well. But I will tell you, the biggest one is we were able to save $1 million in our insurance alone.
Tell me why the board took this over. Was it strictly an economic issue?
Well, I can't say for my peers, other than what they've said on the dais. For myself, philosophically, it was important. This is an inherently governmental function. Inherently governmental functions should be done by government staff, and they should be overseen by the elected officials that have the accountability to the people. Once you start, and I mean, obviously I'm very much a big believer in the free market world, but I also believe that if it's an inherently governmental function, it shouldn't be in the free market, and if it's not an inherently governmental function, then it should not be done by the government. So we righted that wrong, and I thought that was an extraordinarily good decision on the part of the board. We saw immediate savings. We are still working a little bit. Most of the conflict comes from the union really being more focused on trying to keep things the way they were. The way they were is simply not sustainable, and in my opinion, not really fair.
Okay, and before we even jump into that, so there's no question that you support public transportation, access to public transportation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was a talking point that some people tried to say, that I wanted to shut down ECAT. There's never been one soundbite. It's like Doug's angry, but you can't find one snippet of film where I was ever raising my voice. This is the same thing here. I know that some people said that I wanted to shut down ECAT. There was never one time when I said that we need to do away with ECAT. What we do need to do is, if we're going to do it, we need to do it well. We need to do it at our potential, and that means running it efficiently and effectively.
So a lot of the controversy then has come over the fact that you have suggested that some of the routes maybe be eliminated.
Absolutely.
And let's talk about that.
Okay, so we are a town of about 300,000, county of 300,000, city of 50,000, 27 routes here in Escambia County. I drill in a place called Greensboro, North Carolina, a much larger city that only has 19 routes.
You drill, so
I'm sorry.
We've gotten a little off the subject there, but let's go ahead.
I'm a Navy Reserve officer. Okay. My command is a unit up in Greensboro, so a comparable size if you look at it as countywide, but a much larger city within that county. 19 routes. Okay, so we just have too many routes, and sometimes. And that's the hard part, really, of being in government, is sometimes you just have to say things, you have to tell people things that they really do not want to hear. Now, certainly, there are people who live along some of those very low-use routes that would be negatively affected. but we simply don't have the ability as good financial stewards to provide bus service everywhere in the county where the citizens do not live that would use it. So let me give you an example. Out of those routes, we've got, our highest performing routes, 27, 25, 22 riders per hour. That is a healthy bus route. You are clearly providing the service that the people want. We have 8 routes that have 8 or fewer riders per hour. We've got 1 route that has 1 rider per hour, and 2 that have 1 rider per hour, 1 that has 2 riders per hour. And Dee Dee, I don't even know if we're counting the bus driver on that. Okay, those are clearly routes that we are providing that the citizens, by choosing not to ride it, they're telling us that we don't need that.
What happens to those unfortunate people on those routes that will be eliminated that have relied on it? And do we have statistical information that shows that they are regular users?
No, we don't have that statistical information, and that's an unfortunate part about it. So before I answer your question, let's keep in mind that your most needy, okay, your elderly and your handicapped, they do not rely on fixed route transit. They have what's called an on-demand transit, which is provided by a contractor called ITL, and that's actually a state-managed function. We have a little bit of a play in it, but it's a state-managed function. And they are doing a phenomenal job. For these, the most needy among us, that they say, hey, I need a car, I need a ride to the doctor at this time, they get that ride. They don't have to go sit at a bus stop for 30 minutes in the rain. And I think that's appropriate. Honestly, I don't know what the profit, I don't even look at that in a profit and loss type of thing. That's just doing the right thing by the most needy among us. So, oftentimes the emotional argument of, well, what about the elderly and what about the handicapped? They are taken care of very well through ITL. So when we eliminate those bus routes that have so few riders, that is absolutely going, it would be foolish to say otherwise. That is going to have an impact on people. There's no question about it. For some, it may mean that they have to come up with other means to get to work. For some, it may mean that they have to move back into the core of the community. Because you have to understand, for mass transit to work, you need masses. So when you try to run mass transit out into low-density areas, it simply stops working. It collapses very quickly. And beyond that, those masses in the core end up suffering because you stretch your resources too thin. So we've got routes that are running 27 riders per hour. We need to increase the buses on that and the frequency of those routes so that people are waiting less.
Doug, you have done so much more research on this issue than I have, but let me just throw something out there. And on these routes where you get fewer than 8 riders an hour, is it possible to just cut back on the number of runs that they're making rather than cut those routes completely?
There absolutely are. You can, and actually not just that. You can modify your routes, which we've done some.
So we're looking at all of
comprehensive
this?
route analysis. You can also move away from these big metro buses into smaller buses. You can use other methods to provide those services. And yes, we're looking at all of those. It gets very hard to have that discussion when when you first say, look, these routes are non-performing and they need to be addressed. The next thing that happens on Facebook is somebody says Underhill hates buses and puppies, and actually the union filed a lawsuit against me at one point for just wanting to have this discussion. Obviously, it was dropped because it was unfounded, but that's the kind of thing that we could, if we would, from, I say both sides of the aisle, but America doesn't work that way anymore. There's like 70 sides of the aisle, right? If all of us would come together and just address the issues, instead of the name calling and instead of trying to use the issue as a means to get your guy in power, we would be able to solve all these issues and have time and money left over.
Unfortunately, I think it has become so ingrained in people that they have to identify with one party or the other, and and it's not even permissible anymore to reach across an aisle and have this kind of conversation. But you're right, if all of the experts come together on this and determine the best way to deal with this, is it a smaller type of vehicle? Is it fewer number of runs per day? But if we have an obvious problem that is costing taxpayers this much money, and there is a reasonable way to deal with it without major impact on people. It's a shame you can't get all the people to the table. So
Indeed.
there's your challenge. there's
It
a,
absolutely is,
a big challenge.
but it's all of our challenge, Dee Dee. It's not just the elected officials are scared to actually take on these hard projects because you're going to get sued. You're going to have memes about you on Facebook and all that, and all of those things. Come together on election time, and you end up with billboards saying that you're a mean and angry person. If we would all throttle back on the hatred and the anger, we'll find that the things that bind us together are so much greater than the things that separate us. And if we just work on the hard projects that we need to work on, we will be so tired at the end of the day we won't have time to fight.
Well, as we said with beach access, where do we go? What's next? What's next on ECAT?
Well, we have been certainly making some great progress. We are still working to try to get the union to understand that the future actually looks better for those workers than the past did. I believe that every employee of the county should have the exact same benefits package that I do. And in fact, I think my benefits package is actually too high. I don't know that my wife would agree with that, but I mean, this is supposed to be public service. It doesn't make any sense to me that your elected officials would be on a different health plan or different pay scales or anything else. We should all suffer and prosper together. And I think that will be better for those drivers, but I think that you have to be honest with yourself about what right looks like, and constantly trying to grow and expand should not be the goal, because bigger isn't better. Better is better. So we need to go to a quality model, not a quantity model.
What issues is your day filled with? What are the calls coming in? And I know that they do come in, but what are you hearing most from the people, especially in District 2? And there are plenty of people, I know how this works, there are plenty of people countywide that really don't even know which district they live in anyway, and so they're going to call someone who is the most visible to them. Mm-hmm. But what are your calls? What are you hearing?
Infrastructure and public safety. We got 2 buckets and they fill up every single day. It's always infrastructure and public safety. The code enforcement stuff, we're trying to move that. That's not something that ever should have been in the county commissioner's office. That should be staff doing that. And we're trying to move that out and professionalize it more. But the reality is, it's stormwater, it's street lights, it's streets that work, sidewalks that actually go somewhere.
Security, protection,
safety around schools, safety around our bases. Because in my district, people are extremely patriotic. I wouldn't say that they aren't anywhere else, but I mean, we're just so close to the military model on the west side. Everybody knows somebody who's in uniform, and it's just very important to us to be able to protect those bases. So really, that's it. It's public safety and infrastructure. That probably covers 98% of the phone calls that come in.
And I know that we talked an awful lot about the sheriff's budget when we did a show before, which I'd love to come back to again, but I know we're going to run short of time. So let's talk about the Triumph funds. Frame up the issue.
So that is a great, Triumph is $1.5 billion of the BP money that is focused not on the environmental things, but to be focused on the restoring the economy and bringing the economy back that was harmed during the BP oil spill. One of the things that we learned about the BP oil spill, and the statement that you'll often hear, is that we need to diversify our economy. We are very heavily dependent upon the federal government through the military and also through tourism. So when one of those takes a big hit, we as a community take a hit. So there's some merit in the idea of diversifying the economy. Unfortunately, I think that conversation has gone too far in that direction, and we've forgotten that we also need to dance with the one that brung us. We just brought 2 Coast Guard cutters in this year. They're now home ported here in Pensacola. Next year we have 2 more Coast Guard cutters coming in. That right there, just those 4 ships, that's more full-time jobs, full-time employees than the VTMAE Project 1, the Phase 1 brought in. We brought those jobs in without spending any local taxpayer dollars. So we have to, while I understand and appreciate the diversify model, you really also have to focus on what do we do great, what makes us great. And then leverage the things that you're great at to the things that you're not so good at, and bring those things up.
Well, and that's true, because I'm a huge supporter of the expansion at the airport. I think that, sometimes it's certainly warranted to spend taxpayers' dollars to create those jobs, but then you also have to realize when you can take advantage of other situations
Yep.
and capitalize on
and that's
on
one
that
that
as
we
well.
disagree on, and that I don't think that that's a great one at all for us, in that we're trying to create something from scratch instead of building on what we're already great at. But that's the conversations we ought to be having in public.
And we are. We're running so short on time again, Doug. I mean, there's always so much to talk about. You certainly don't mind speaking your piece before the commission. You're known as a hard hitter, passionate about the issues, but I think that you have done a really good job in doing your homework. Even if people don't agree with you, I think that you rationalize it and make them understand why you feel the way that you do, and you never hesitate to have that conversation. But in wrap up, why don't you tell the voters a little bit about, we have about 2 minutes tops, but tell the voters a little bit about what they can expect moving forward.
So yes, it's funny that I get a bit of a reputation as being that hard hitter and driving home driving my point home. I'm advocating for the best people in America, the citizens of Escambia County. I would not go into that and do a half-measure job for them. It's important that I go in there and speak well, be very informed on the issues. But I also, when I listen not to respond. I listen in order to understand. And in understanding, sometimes my position will change on things. That's how this process is supposed to work. At the end of the day, we have to leave our egos at the door, and we have to leave our decisions on the dais. We've done that for 4 years, I think, for the most part. And the next 4 years, we are going to be having we talked about the ECAT, we talked about Triumph. We are going to be dealing with some of the hardest issues that this county's ever had to deal with. You need people that are in there who are willing to do the hard work of understanding, not just the facts, but understanding each other. And that's what I promise to do for the next 4 years.
Thank you, Doug. It's always interesting having this conversation with you. I've enjoyed it tremendously. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Underhill, candidate for the Escambia County Board of Commissioners, District 2, and the incumbent. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks. My pleasure.